My mother-in-law and husband headed to a luxury spa retreat while I was left to host his business guests at home. Before they left, she snickered, "Don't embarrass yourself, they're out of your league." The next day, one of the guests slipped me a note that read, "They've been lying to you for years." What I discovered was, last weekend, my husband and my mother-in-law left me to host a business gathering at our home while they spent a few days at a luxury spa in Vermont. Right before leaving, she gave me her usual cruel smirk and said, "Don't embarrass yourself, these people are way out of your league." I plastered on a fake smile and wished them a good trip. The next evening, one of the business guests slipped a note into my hand while I was clearing glasses. It simply said, "They've been lying to you for years." At first, I thought it was a mistake. I couldn't have imagined just how deep the betrayal really went, and how long it had been going on right under my nose. Now I'm sitting here, still shaking, needing advice because everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my life has fallen apart in a matter of days. When Christopher first suggested I host his clients, I had a weird feeling in my stomach. It wasn't that I couldn't handle a few business people, I've hosted dozens of charity events and small dinners, but something about the way he brought it up felt dismissive. Like I was a hired hand, not his wife. Vivian made it worse. Always impeccably dressed, always subtly cruel. That morning, she stood by the door, tapping one manicured nail against her suitcase handle, while Christopher barked last-minute instructions about the wine list. "Don't embarrass yourself," she said, not even looking me in the eye. "They're out of your league." I smiled and bit my tongue, just like I had 100 times before. The gathering itself went okay. At least, from the outside. Our house, a colonial on K Street, looked beautiful, filled with fresh flowers and the smell of catered hors d'oeuvres. I floated through conversations, filling wine glasses, laughing politely at jokes I didn't understand. I recognized a few names from Christopher's stories, Alan Mercer, Raymond Knox, and two others whose wives looked like they had been pulled straight out of a Saks Fifth Avenue catalog. Alan was different though. Quieter. Watchful. He asked me real questions, about the house, the garden, not about stock portfolios or country clubs. I was balancing a tray of champagne glasses when he brushed past me in the hall. His hand lightly bumped mine, and when I looked down, there was a small folded piece of paper tucked into my apron pocket. My stomach flipped. I didn't open it until I was safely in the kitchen, hidden behind the swinging door. It was a single line, written in neat block letters. "They've been lying to you for years." At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe Alan meant it for someone else. Maybe it was some weird joke I didn't get. But deep down, I knew. I knew, because I had ignored so many signs for so long. The business trips that didn't make sense. The sudden emergencies that pulled Christopher away during anniversaries and birthdays. The way Vivian inserted herself into every decision we made, from buying our house to managing my inheritance, always cloaked in advice. Still, reading it, seeing it in writing, was a punch to the gut. That night, long after the guests left and the house was silent, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The note burned a hole in my pocket. I kept reading it over and over again. By 3 a.m., I knew I couldn't ignore it. I started with Christopher's office. It was supposed to be off limits to me, something about confidentiality and client trust, but that night, I didn't care. At first, I found nothing unusual. Pens, legal pads, a stack of unread magazines. But the bottom drawer was locked. It didn't take much, a bobby pin from my hair and a shaky hand, and it popped open. Inside were folders. Dozens of them. Bank statements, investment documents, expense reports. My name was on many of them, alongside companies I had never heard of. Restaurants. Hotels. Jewelry stores. Private travel agencies. All with dates that coincided with weekends Christopher had been working late. I sat on the floor, numb, flipping through the evidence of my own humiliation. And then I found the emails. They were worse than I could have imagined. Conversations between Christopher and Vivian, plotting ways to unlock more of my trust fund money. Joking about how naive I was. Planning business investments that were fake, elaborate scams designed to siphon money out of our joint accounts and into ones controlled by Christopher. And then, buried deep in a hidden folder on his computer, the pictures. Christopher and Savannah, his assistant, in hotel rooms. On beaches. At restaurants. Not work trips. Romantic getaways. In some photos, Christopher wore the same watch he had given me for our 10th anniversary, the one I had worn proudly, thinking it was a symbol of our enduring marriage. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there on the office floor, the documents and photos spread around me like the wreckage after a storm. I stayed there until the sun started to rise, painting the windows pink and gold. And then I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust, Miriam Bellamy. We'd been roommates in college, and she was now a lawyer specializing in high-net-worth divorces. I hadn't seen her in years, not because of any falling out, but because Vivian had slowly isolated me from my old friends. Miriam answered on the first ring. "Hannah," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. "Is everything okay?" "No," I whispered. "I need your help." Miriam didn't ask many questions over the phone. She just told me to scan everything I had found and send it over, immediately and securely. I spent the next few hours methodically copying every email, every invoice, every photograph onto a password-protected drive. I moved like a machine, fueled by anger, shame, and something I hadn't felt in years, a sliver of power. By the time Christopher and Vivian returned from Vermont that Sunday night, my plan was already quietly underway. They came through the door laughing, dragging their luggage behind them, faces pink from spa treatments and expensive champagne. Christopher leaned in to kiss my cheek, and I barely flinched. I forced myself to smile. Vivian sniffed at the air like something smelled off. "Hopefully you didn't burn the house down while we were gone," she said, her voice light but cutting as ever. "I managed just fine," I said, forcing myself to sound normal. The guests enjoyed themselves. Christopher beamed, clapping me on the shoulder like I was a loyal employee who had completed a difficult assignment. I watched them unload their bags, discussing mundane things like who they'd seen at the spa and how relaxing it had been. Listening to them talk, so ordinary, so at ease, was surreal. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Christopher left early for meetings, and Vivian stayed behind. She spent most of the morning in the sunroom, sipping coffee and flipping through magazines like she owned the place. Meanwhile, I was meeting with Miriam at her downtown office. The first thing Miriam did was give me a long, searching look, the kind only an old friend could give. Then she hugged me hard, no words needed. "I've seen worse cases," she said, pulling back. "But this is bad, Hannah. Really bad. They've been setting you up for a long time." We sat down together, going through the documents piece by piece. Miriam took notes, occasionally muttering under her breath when she found something particularly damning. "They opened shell companies in your name," she said, tapping a folder. "If this gets messy, they could try to blame you." My stomach twisted. "Blame me? For their fraud?" Miriam nodded grimly. "We'll get ahead of it. But we have to move fast." "Do you trust me?" I nodded without hesitation. "Good. First step, protect your assets." Today. The next few days were a blur of activity. I opened new bank accounts. Froze every shared credit card. Called the trust manager handling my inheritance and explained that under no circumstances were any withdrawals to be authorized without my direct written approval. Through it all, I moved carefully, keeping up appearances at home. Smiling at Christopher when he came through the door at night. Making small talk with Vivian over breakfast. There were moments I wanted to scream. Moments when the anger bubbled so hot under my skin that I had to excuse myself to the bathroom just to breathe. But I kept it together. Because Miriam had a plan, and it depended on patience. Let them think they're still in control, she advised. It'll make the fall even harder. Late one evening, about a week after the guests had been over, Christopher came home later than usual. I was curled up on the living room couch with a book I wasn't really reading. He flopped down next to me, smelling faintly of whiskey and expensive cologne. Long day? I asked, keeping my voice light. You could say that, he muttered, loosening his tie. He leaned his head back against the couch, closing his eyes. Clients are getting antsy. Market's unpredictable. I studied him. His handsome face, the early lines around his mouth from years of smug smiles. How had I ever loved him so blindly? I'm proud of you, I said softly. He opened one eye and grinned. Thanks, babe. I smiled back and tucked my feet under me, pretending to settle in for the night. Inside, my heart hammered in my chest. I felt like I was sharing a couch with a snake. 2 days later, the first wave hit. Vivian received a cease and desist letter barring her from conducting any financial activity under my name. She threw a screaming fit when she opened it in the kitchen, calling me ungrateful and hysterical. Christopher stormed home shortly afterward, waving a stack of legal papers. His face was a furious mask. What the hell is this, Hannah? He bellowed, slamming the papers onto the kitchen island. What are you trying to pull? I stayed calm. Too calm. You'll have to ask my lawyer, I said coolly, stepping around him to pour myself a cup of tea. You know. The one I had to hire because my own husband and his mother were stealing from me. He blanched. For a second, he genuinely looked scared. I don't know what you're talking about, he said quickly, the words tumbling out. Vivian stalked into the room, face twisted with rage. How dare you accuse us? After everything we've done for you? I set down my tea with a quiet clink. Everything you've done to me, you mean? Vivian's voice rose, shrill and shaky, as she tried to regain control. You're nothing without us, she sneered. You would still be living in that dingy little apartment if it weren't for Christopher. You think you can survive in this world on your own? I stared at her for a long moment, taking in the woman who had once terrified me. She didn't scare me anymore. You're wrong, I said, my voice low and steady. You needed me. My money. My name. My silence. Christopher opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but the sight of me standing there, calm, composed, completely unmoved by his rage, seemed to stun him into silence. I picked up the legal documents and handed them back to him. I suggest you read those carefully. Especially the part about the fraud charges. Then I walked out of the room, leaving them both standing there, fuming and helpless. The next few weeks were brutal, for them, not for me. Christopher's firm was investigated. Turned out, Miriam had tipped off the right people at the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. Once they started pulling at the threads, the entire fake empire unraveled almost overnight. His accounts were frozen. His assets seized. Clients he had defrauded, people much wealthier and more powerful than him, filed lawsuits. Suddenly, the man who had always walked into a room with a smirk and a Rolex was being served court summonses and humiliated in public. Vivian fared no better. Word spread fast among the social circles she had clawed her way into. Invitations dried up. Friends stopped calling. She became a pariah, whispered about behind manicured hands at charity luncheons and fundraisers. And the best part? They couldn't touch a dime of my inheritance. Miriam had made sure of that. I stayed in the house. It was in my name alone, paid for long before Christopher slithered his way into my life. He tried to fight for it, of course, but between the prenup he had forgotten he signed, thanks to Vivian insisting I was too poor to bother, and the fraud charges, he didn't stand a chance. He ended up moving into a cramped rental across town, no marble countertops, no ocean views. Just him and his regrets. Vivian moved in with her sister in Connecticut, a sister who apparently hated her guts and made no secret of it. I wish I could say I danced with joy the day my divorce was finalized, but honestly, it was quieter than that. It was a sunny morning. I sat alone at a little cafe on Thames Street, sipping my coffee and reading over the final papers. When I signed my name at the bottom, I felt free. Not giddy, not triumphant, just free. Alan Mercer, the man who had slipped me the note that started it all, reached out once, about a month later. Just a simple email. "Hope you're doing okay. You deserved better." I replied, thanking him for his honesty. We met for coffee once, purely as friends. He told me he'd left the company too, said he couldn't stomach working for people like Christopher anymore. We still exchange emails now and then. No romance. Just two people who survived the same storm, grateful for calmer waters. As for me? I renovated the house, painted the walls a soft, warm yellow, pulled up the stiff old carpets Vivian had insisted on, planted a garden filled with wildflowers in the backyard. I started volunteering full-time at the local women's shelter, using my experience, my pain, to help other women rebuild their lives after betrayal. It's not glamorous work. It doesn't come with designer handbags or luxury spa weekends. But it's real. Every morning when I wake up in my sunlit bedroom, I stretch out in bed and smile. Because I know now. I wasn't out of their league. They were never even in mine.